So just to give you my own introduction and lay out the rules of the game, welcome to the Democratic Senatorial Candidate Night. This is being hosted by the Sterling Democratic Committee, and I'm Lex Thomas. I'm also editor of Sterling Meeting House News, and I'm your moderator for this event, and it's my great pleasure to be here with you and with the candidates this evening. On Tuesday, November 7th, voters in the Worcester and Middlesex district will head to the polls for a special state primary to select a Democratic candidate to run in the special state election on Tuesday, December 5th. And that election in December is to choose a full-time state senator for the Worcester and Middlesex district. Today, we want to give voters the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates whose names are on the primary ballot. And we want to give candidates an opportunity to tell you, the voters, what they feel you need to know to make informed decisions on both primary day and election day. The rules of this forum are as follows. I will introduce the three candidates, although that's basically been done. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to deliver an opening statement, and as Stephen said, the order was chosen by drawing lots prior to the event. And there will be closing statements as well, and then we'll just go in the opposite direction. So we'll start closing with Mike Mahan, we'll go on to Sue Shalafu, Zephyr, and finish with Michael Kuzmarek. Now, your moderator here is also acting as timekeeper. I have a stopwatch that I will activate at the start of each statement of response, and I will hold up this sign, all right, great artistic effort here, when you have 30 seconds remaining, all right? Each candidate has 2 minutes to answer each question from the moderator, and the moderator's questions were provided by the Sterling Democratic Committee. And the order will rotate for each question. So for different questions, different ones will go first. Now, following my questions, members of the public, and we are so delighted to see so many of you here this evening, will have the opportunity to each ask one question plus one follow-up question. And these will be directed through the moderator, which means that you'll raise your hand. I will recognize an audience member that wants to pose a question. I'll invite you to step up to the podium. And once you're up there, you'll state your name and your address and the candidate to whom your question is addressed, unless you want all three of them to answer. And you'll have a minute to pose your question. There will be no speeches allowed from the floor. The purpose is to stand up there and to ask a question. And then candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. Now, even if you address a particular candidate, they will all have the opportunity to answer a question, and I'll give them each that opportunity before we move on to the next question. And then at the close of the question period, each candidate will have 1 minute to deliver a closing statement. I respectfully ask you to abide by these rules. They help the event to run smoothly, and they allow as many people to speak as possible. I also ask respectfully that we observe the rules of proper conduct and speech, that we all refrain from conduct and speech that are disrespectful, prejudicial, inflammatory, or obstructive. And above all, issues are what we're here to address, not personalities. I would also ask that you either silence your cell phones or set them to vibrate. So, as Stephen has already introduced the candidates, I'm going to start right in with your first question. I'm going to start in with the opening statements. I'm in such a hurry to get started with this. So Michael Kuzmarek, seeing as you won the lottery for first up, you have 3 minutes to make an opening statement. You're on.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And my name is Michael Kuzmarek. I'm currently the Fitchburg City Council President, where I've served with the Council for the past 4 years. And I'd like to start just by thanking the Sterling Democratic Town Committee for their efforts in organizing such a wonderful crowd, and for their efforts to make sure that this event is televised this evening for the general public. So, in addition to my work on the Fitchburg City Council, I work by day in higher education. For the past 10 years, I've spent 8 years at Fitchburg State University, and the past 2 at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And my reason for running and seeking this office in many ways is tied to Senator Flanagan and the work that she did throughout this district, but also the personal impact that she had on me and my family directly. And my mother, just a couple of years ago, was having a mental health crisis, and after my mother being stuck in the emergency room for 7 days, and we'd really reached the point of kind of despair and hopelessness of not knowing where to turn. I'm her healthcare proxy and her caregiver, and it was that moment that no son wants to find themselves in, of not knowing where to turn or not knowing how to provide adequate care for someone we love. And in that moment of despair and not knowing where else to turn, I turned to Senator Flanagan and asked for her assistance. And it's never easy reaching out to someone you work with and someone you know and airing out your family's dirty laundry. And it was her response, though, that really exemplified who she was as a public servant and the work that she did in our districts. And it was that she'd be there every step of the way, and that every 6 hours moving forward, that her and her staff would be in touch with me, that they'd be accountable to me, and that if in 72 hours my mother wasn't receiving the proper care that she needed and deserved, that she would hold the Senate, that she would hold the insurance company to account, even if that meant dragging the president of the insurance company to the floor of the Senate. And within 72 hours, come Monday morning, my mother was transferred to the correct facility and receiving the proper care and treatment that her doctors were recommending. And I don't think that happens without Senator Flanagan. And I don't think my mother is living independently today if it weren't for the work that she did. And at the end of the day, I think that's why we all hope to serve in public office, is to be there to answer the call. When you have a desperate constituent, when you have someone who needs help, that you're there to be able to help them. And it was at that resolution, when my mother was being discharged from the hospital, that I turned to my wife, and I remember saying to Carissa, you know, I need to spend the rest of my life giving back and making sure that I can pay this forward and help someone else in a similar situation. So if I spend the rest of my career trying to help one family, one individual, in the way that Senator Flanagan helped me, that's a career well spent. But I know that our representatives, our elected officials, do that each and every day throughout the district. Thank you.
Sue Shalafu-Zephyr.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Sterling Democratic Town Committee for organizing this. This is a wonderful, wonderful turnout. And thank you, Lex, for being here tonight as the moderator and organizer. My name is Sue Shalafu-Zephyr, and I am a city councilor in the city of Leominster. And, oh, louder. Can you, okay.
It might be the mic.
Is it the mic?
Like that while you
Let's see. Is the mic on? Can you hear me now? Or should I? Sorry. It doesn't. It's not. It doesn't seem like it's on. Okay, I'll speak up. All right. So, my name is Sue Shalafu-Zephyr, and I am a city councilor in the city of Leominster. I was born and raised in Leominster. I've lived there my whole life, raised my 3 girls with my husband Ed, who is here with us tonight. I got my start in public service over 20 years ago when I was confronted with a situation. A neighboring community wanted to build an industrial park in the watershed of the Knowtown Reservoir. The Knowtown Reservoir provides 60% of Leominster's water. And at the time, it was quite a huge project. It was very alarming. We were very concerned about the impact that might have. Long story short, I organized with some neighbors, worked with a city councilor. I was not on the council at the time, and also worked with a Conservation Commission member. And what we did is we organized just as a group of people and successfully, I don't want to say defeated the project, but it was not built. And it ended up being a win-win for everybody, because with the assistance of Senator Antonioni at the time, the DEP came in, bought that parcel of land, so the community had an opportunity to take that money and develop the park elsewhere, and the city of Leominster's watershed was protected. So what that experience really taught me is the power of organizing, the power of public advocacy. And after that, I decided to run for the city council. And I did. I ran for the city council. I was the Ward 4 councilor and represented my neighborhood in Leominster, and then in subsequent years ran at large and have been on the city council for many years. In addition to my city council work, I've also, currently I run Jeannie's Helping Hand in Leominster. We're a nonprofit charitable group organization that provides food to people across the north central region. We're partnered with the Worcester County Food Bank, and we also provide fuel assistance as well as temporary emergency shelter. So I've been doing that. And I've also been involved with other things. I serve on the Board of Trustees. I'm a library trustee at the Leominster Public Library. Was very involved. I hope many of you here have gone to the Leominster Public Library. It's just a wonderful, wonderful community asset. And I was part of the building committee, was co-chaired the fundraising for that, also served on the Leominster Ed Foundation, which is a little group that supports public education in Leominster outside of the school system. So why I decided to run, not in a million years did I ever think that I would run for the state Senate, you know, assuming that Senator Flanagan would be in the job for quite a while. And I was as surprised as probably many of you were when she decided to step aside. So I decided to run for the state Senate because it allows me the opportunity to continue doing the work, the advocacy work that I have been doing for a broader group and just a broader constituency. So I can continue the work advocating for people in public education, protecting the environment for a broader constituency, and that's why I'm running.
Thank you, Ms. Shalafu-Zephyr. Mr. Mahan, your opening statement, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Mahan. First off, I would like to thank the Sterling Dems and, in particular, Stephen Warren for pulling all of this together. But also, I'd like to congratulate you on the way that you have reorganized. That's not easy work to do, and you know, some of us have spent some time organizing here in North Central Mass, and it's great to see some activity coming out of Sterling, and it's going to serve the party well. So thank you very much. I come to the race from the technology industry, where I most recently served as an executive at PeerBridge, which is a software maker focused on the shipping and logistics area. As far as service, I've served on the Board of Trustees at Fitchburg State. I've served on the Board of Trustees at Health Alliance Clinton Hospital, the Leominster Planning Board, and the Leominster Water and Sewer Commission. And the reason why I entered the race really stems back to about the time that I started remembering things. Public service for my family is a calling. And I grew up with my father, who was a longtime city councilor in Leominster and the mayor of Leominster. And, you know, my mother, who was city clerk of Leominster, and, you know, hearing the stories of my grandfather and his brother, who were both state reps, and knowing that if you can do good in an elected role, it's your duty to run. And I feel, given the regional experience that I have working with some of the largest institutions in the area, as well as my executive business experience, that I have a great deal to offer the region. I still live in Leominster with my wife, Heather, and our two young daughters, Finna, who's 5, and Merrick, who is 2. And it would be your honor to continue all my service as your next state senator.
Thank you, Mr. Mahan. All right, let us start now with our questions. You will have 2 minutes each to answer each question. And let's start with you, Mr. Kuchmarek. Your first question: do you support an improved Medicare for all health insurance system? And do you believe health care is a right or a privilege?
I believe healthcare is absolutely a right for everyone.
Mike, can you pull the mic closer to you?
Thank you. I believe that healthcare is truly a right and not a privilege. And in particular, you know, I think we look at the United States model of delivering healthcare. We spend more per capita across the United States on healthcare than any other first world nation, yet we don't get the return on investment that other countries receive. I think we can look at a number of different models across the first world and really look at different ways of delivering healthcare that are different or better than the way we currently deliver it. We have some of the best hospitals and the best medically trained personnel in the United States, but yet we have a long way to go. And I think each one of us, you may not have the same experience that I did with my mother, but in many cases, I think we've all seen evidence of the insurance industry or healthcare costs personally affecting families. It certainly disproportionately affects areas like our own, like North Central Massachusetts and urban areas and gateway communities. So I think we need to make sure that we can close the gap in being able to deliver healthcare and make sure that we deliver exceptional healthcare to everyone, regardless of cost.
Thank you. Same question, Ms. Shalafou-Zephyr.
Thank you, Lex. I do believe that healthcare is a right, not a privilege, absolutely. And I also do support moving toward a single payer plan. Rep. Benson from Lunenburg has proposed a plan that would go into effect after I think it's a 3-year period where the costs, in order to demonstrate the need to go to a single payer, there's a process in her bill that would allow the cost to be evaluated in order to move forward with that. So I do support that, to answer your question, yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Mahan, same question.
I also believe that healthcare is absolutely a right for all people. It doesn't matter, where you are on the socioeconomic spectrum or how you come into the healthcare system. I absolutely believe that you deserve the care that you need and that we should work towards ensuring that's available for all of our residents. I think single payer and Medicare for all is a wonderful goal. I think there's a lot to do on the refinement of that before we get to it, though. As I read the bill, I thought back to my time in healthcare, and it would single-handedly eliminate the private insurance market in Massachusetts as part of the bill. That poses a significant challenge to caregivers and caregiver organizations who rely on private insurance payments to kind of buoy the payments that they get from the public payer system. So while I support the idea of going to single payer, I think we have significant work to do to see how we can do that while not disrupting the type of care that our residents get.
Thank you, candidates, and here is your second question. How have you demonstrated a commitment to civil rights, and what action steps will you take to protect the rights and lives of members of the LGBT community and members of different faiths and races? Let's start this time with Ms. Shalafou-Zephyr.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. As a city councilor, it's our responsibility to treat everybody who comes before the council equally and, with respect. In terms of LGBT community, as a state senator, I certainly would support the laws that are in place and ensure that those are adhered to. I know that there's some talk about trying to walk some of those back, and I would not support that at all. So I'm a very strong supporter of equal rights and would work very hard to make sure that people who are entitled to those rights have them applied properly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahan. And I realize that these questions are sometimes multi-part. If you need the question repeated, just say so.
Could you repeat the question? Now that you say that?
Absolutely. How have you demonstrated a commitment to civil rights? What action steps will you take to protect the rights and lives of members of the LGBT community and members of different faiths and races?
Sure, thank you. Through my work at Fitchburg State, I've worked with the administration to ensure that all students, and admittedly, it's our student core that we were thinking about, but it should be extended to everyone, have the same opportunities and are encouraged to be an active part of the community. And I think that we can do that in the broader community as well. There's an active LGBTQ community at Fitchburg State. That's been encouraged by the board and by the administration. There are active groups for folks of other religions. That's been encouraged by the board and the administration. And it's been an honor to be a part of that. And I think it's incredibly important work. What action steps I would take for the LGBTQ community? First of all, absolute equality needs to be protected for people regardless of any kind of orientation, any religion, any faith, any skin coloring, whatever you want to look at. People are people, and our laws need to reflect that. And I think it's a very basic driver. As simple as people being people. And as for groups of different religions, I coil when I think about a Muslim registry or any other kind of registry in those kind of things. And I would work day in and day out if I had to oppose things like that in our society so that everyone is treated equal.
Thank you. Mr. Kuchmarek.
It's been an honor as a member of the Fitchburg City Council to vote to increase the size of our Human Rights Commission just within this past year, making sure that there's representation across all faiths and backgrounds throughout the city of Fitchburg, particularly as the city with the largest first-generation population throughout this district. It's been an honor to serve a diverse population and make sure that all feel welcome and a part of our community. Particularly during talks of travel bans. I was honored to be joined by Representative Stephen Hay and be present at rallies, making sure that those in our community felt that Fitchburg and North Central Massachusetts was every bit their home as much as it was anyone else's. I've also worked diligently to make sure that residents in our communities with disability are represented throughout our Disabilities Commission, and that their rights and their issues regarding particularly accessibility to our downtowns and our city's infrastructure are a crucial part of our process throughout City Council and our Public Works committees. Moving forward as a legislator, it certainly use any and every legislative weapon or tool that we have to make sure that those in the LGBTQ community feel that not only that they're welcomed, but feel and are treated equally across the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Here's your third question, and we will begin this time with Mr. Mahan. The people of Massachusetts voted to legalize marijuana. How do you feel about implementation of the law and how it's progressing? And is the slow pace of implementation a de facto override of the people's will?
I do not feel that the slow pace of implementation is an override of the people's will. I think it's our duty as a society to understand that marijuana is in our communities, it's legal, and it's coming. But we need to have the right structure built around it. And we need to ensure that industry is not necessarily governing that structure. And I think the steps that are being taken by the Cannabis Control Commission that Senator Flanagan has joined, and that the steps in the legislature are ensuring just that, so that our rollout of legalized recreational marijuana is the smoothest that we've seen in the nation yet.
Thank you, Mr. Mahan. Mr. Kuchmarek.
So I think it's important that we take a deliberative process, that we not delay it further than it needs to be delayed. But at the same time, I'm thrilled that Senator Flanagan, now Commissioner Flanagan, serves on that commission to make sure that the public safety community feels they have the tools necessary to be able to regulate it in accordance, as well as that towns have guidelines to be able to properly roll this out and adhere to statewide guidelines to make sure that children and minors and at-risk populations are adequately protected. At the same time, this was the will of the voters, and I think we need to make sure that while we're doing this at a deliberative pace, that we also move in an expeditious one to adhere to what our voters have asked for. Particularly we look at the medical marijuana rollout, and I think that was there were some disordinate delays there. And I know, many towns and communities did not have access to what was deemed a medical treatment by our own taxpayers and voters. And I think we need to make sure that as a medical treatment, that we continue to roll that out as quickly as possible and make sure that we're providing medical care and treatment to those who need it in our communities.
Thank you. Same question, Ms. Shalafou-Zephyr.
Thank you very much. I was on the city council when we were trying to organize, our approach to medicinal marijuana. We were very deliberate. We talked, about zoning and about, location of facilities for dispensing and cultivating. And even though it is taking, I know the proponents of recreational marijuana, I think, believe that it's taking longer. I think we need to take, the appropriate steps to ensure that, that laws are in place, that law enforcement folks have the tools that they need, to enforce any kind of problems with it. And as a city councilor in Leominster, I am happy to say, though, that one of our councilors proposed a moratorium on dealing with recreational marijuana, and I did not support that. So we do not have a moratorium in Leominster. We're going to deal with it very proactively, and we're looking at things in terms of zoning and how we can best roll it out appropriately for the community.
Candidates, and this is your fourth and final question from the committee before we open it to the floor. And we shall go back to starting with Mr. Kuchmarek. You have all said that you are moderate Democrats. Why do you consider yourself a moderate, and are there any ways that you identify with the progressive movement?
So I'll start with, I identify with the progressive movement in terms of healthcare for all and making sure that everyone has equal access to quality healthcare. I also consider myself a progressive when it comes to social justice and making sure that all feel safe and welcome in our communities, and that we're looking at criminal justice as a way, our criminal justice system as a way of not only keeping our communities safe, but also a way of reforming criminals and criminal behavior and making sure that we're reintegrating those who have gone through our criminal justice system back into our communities in a way that's humane and reformative. I do consider myself moderate, though, in that I think it's important. We have a Republican governor right now who has made every intent to work with a democratically controlled legislature. I don't agree with everything that our governor says and does, but at the end of the day, we have a two-party system largely in this country, and I think it's important that the two parties can work together, and that it's not always about the letter next to your name. It's about who has the best idea, who's going to move the Commonwealth forward and keep us moving in the best direction. So I think it's important at times to put our politics aside and make sure that we're working with the best idea and making sure that we're all moving in the same direction for the best interests of the taxpayers and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Thank you. Michelle Zephyr.
Thank you very much. I don't describe myself as a moderate. I describe myself as a hardcore Democrat, and depending on the issue, I guess some people would label me progressive, some people might label me moderate. In terms of supporting a $15 minimum wage over, increasing that over 4 years, I absolutely support that. In terms of supporting the Fair Share Amendment that I hope will be on next year's ballot to help us make very needed investments in infrastructure and in education, I completely support that. Some might label that progressive. I certainly support moving towards a single-payer healthcare system, and we need to get insurance company profits out of the healthcare system. That's a real problem. We need to also get pharmaceutical company profits out of the system. So depending on the issue, some people may think that they might want to label me progressive, and that's fine. And on other issues, I think I am fiscally conservative and more moderate when it comes to taxation. And people might say, well, that's inconsistent with the Fair Share Amendment. Not really. I don't think it is. I've taken some anti-tax stands in Leominster as a city councilor. I voted against raising the hotel room tax in Leominster to 6%. I didn't think there was a really good rationale, and there was no plan for that added revenue, where it was going to be spent. So, depending on the issue, I am either, I kind of run the full gamut, but I'm a staunch Democrat, and I'm very proud to say that. Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mahan.
Thank you. I'm wearing a blue jacket tonight. I too, I think all of us, yeah. And I too would paint myself with a bright royal blue brush, in that I am a Democrat through and through, have been. January 7th, 1997, I can remember going to see my mother, who's sitting right there, to register to vote, and that's the day that I joined the Democratic Party. And I will be in that party until the day that I die, and seeing the way that we're lifting up and organizing really drives that home. I would describe myself as a moderate. As I mentioned earlier, I come from the business world where I have served as an executive. I've also served on the financial side of the house. And that typically gives me reason to be fiscally conservative, which can be inconsistent with some of the things that a progressive bill will push. Absolutely not to say that it's fiscally irresponsible. It's just a different approach. I certainly agree with I certainly associate myself with progressives on social justice, on, Bob Serafkan I was talking with earlier, the, getting corporate money out of, overturning Citizens United, on the environment. The environment's critical and something needs to be done, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but we have to do it anyway. And certainly on criminal justice reform, the way the bill that's moving through the Senate now can really make a difference for a lot of people in the system and give us flexibility to deal with folks that we hadn't have prior.
Thank you, candidates. Well, now it's your turn. We're going to open the questions up to the floor now, just to remind you that you're going to have the opportunity to ask a question and one follow-up question. You'll raise your hand. I will recognize you, hopefully with some help here, because we have quite a few people. I want to make sure that I don't miss anybody from my little vantage point here. You'll step up to the podium, which is, well, up to the mic right here. You'll state your name, your address, and you'll ask your question. You'll have a maximum of 1 minute to ask your question, and you can address a particular candidate if you wish. That candidate will answer, and then the other candidates will also have an opportunity. If you just want to address your question to all three of them, that's fine too. So, we've got a taker.
That was quick.
Get it going. Hi, I'm Patricia Ward. I live here in Sterling. I'm actually on the committee, and I've been in education for 29 years, and I'd like to know, all of you, how you stand on charter schools. Thank you.
All right, well, last time we started again with Mr. Kuchmarek. Let's start with Ms. Shalafou-Zephyr.
Thank you very much. Charter schools offer parents, an alternative. But the problem with charter schools is that they're taking limited funds away from public school systems, and I think that's a problem. If we can get a mechanism in place to adequately fund all of our public schools, then I think the discussion about charters is another one that we can have. Now, I can hear it. But no, charter schools, the way that the funding mechanism is currently set up, I really don't support any expansion of them because I think they're really hurting our public school systems that are under stress.
Mr. Mahan.
Thank you. Charter schools serve as an alternative, as Sue said, and particularly in urban school districts, the usefulness shows up in the parent feedback. The problem that I have with them is that it's public money that's going to fund them with no public accountability. It's not a school committee that governs that money. It's a board of directors that governs that money, and that is wrong. And I think that money should stay in a school system, and we should improve the school system to further serve all students, not just build a special one for a few.
I'll be clear on this. I'm unapologetically opposed to charter schools. I would liken it to, we have cracks and potholes in our road. We wouldn't then build a new road next to it and build a second system. We would reinvest in the one that we currently have and fix our road. The same is true with our public school systems. I would say we have exceptional public school systems throughout our district and throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The solution is reinvesting in our education and fully funding our education system. The Foundation Budget Review Commission stated that more than $1 billion was necessary to fund our public education systems throughout the Commonwealth. We need to follow through on those implementations, not then fund alternative schools. I look at the newest catchphrase is empowerment zones in Western Massachusetts, which are likened to charter schools. Again, we're talking about systems that siphon away funding from public schooling infrastructure. and it doesn't help us improve our current school systems. It takes away from the vast majority of our students who are currently in our public schools, who need every investment and every dollar that we can make as a state, local, and federal government in our schooling and in our children's education.
I think Michelle Zephyr had something else that you wanted to
I'm good.
add to that. You're all right? All right. Next question. Come on up.
Hi, Arden Sonnenberg, North Row Road, Sterling. Blue's a power color. That's one thing I learned as a psych undergrad and haven't forgot about it. And Frank Cummings made me realize tonight that we can't forget about it with his hat. Mainly because what says on the side of it, and that war is not an answer. Not that you're all going to be making those kinds of decisions probably at the State House, but I'd like to know, you'll be in a position of power, and I'd like to know how you will use that power in office.
First off, I'd like to say I love that WPI shirt you're wearing, which is my alma mater. The position of power is real when you're in elected office, but I think what's more real is your ability to stay on Main Street and work with folks on the issues that are affecting them. And you let that feed up to what you're going to focus on when you're, how to use your position. You need to use your position to help the people who need the most help. We need to serve our most vulnerable. We have a mental health crisis in this area, in this state, and we need to serve those folks. We need to make sure resources are coming back so that people get the care that they need to live their best lives. Additionally, we need to stand up for our seniors. We're sitting in a beautiful senior citizen center right now. I wish that every city and town had something like this, and I wish that critical services could be extended to folks like that, that clearly are being extended here. We need to serve our veterans better. Well, many of our veterans are coming home from the engagements and leaving the military, and they need significant mental health help, and they also need an integration back into society, and I'm proud to have worked on that while at Fitchburg State. And third, we need to serve our children better, and I will stand up for children. At-risk children in the system, they need an advocate. I will be a strong voice for them, as well as focusing on a universal pre-K and an expanded full-day kindergarten offering within the schools.
Thank you. Mr. Kushmarek.
As a legislator, you have the incredible power of, from the floor of the Senate or from a council chamber being able to cast a vote for a policy or for whether it's a change in a city code or an act that will change lives throughout the Commonwealth. But I think equal power can be placed on a legislator's ability to work with constituents each and every day in their districts, and not to forget that when you're surrounded by legislators in Boston, that there are people behind every act and every vote that you cast. And I think I plan to use that power, that position, to make sure that the residents of North Central Massachusetts and of the Worcester and Middlesex district feel represented, that they have an accessible state senator that they can contact, and that you can be an empathetic senator and an empathetic legislator who understands the issues and can relate to the issues that residents experience each and every day. I also think it's important that we look at bipartisanship. I spoke about it earlier, and I defended that label as being a moderate. I look at the divide and the divisiveness that's happening in Washington. We cannot allow that to permeate our state and local governments. That is tearing our country apart at a national level, and I think at a local and a state level, we have so much power and authority to be able to bring people together. In Massachusetts, we have a Commonwealth that is moving forward and surging forward, and we need to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind. But I think that also allows us to bring together legislators, Republicans, Democrats, forget about the title, forget about the letter next to your name, and make sure that we find that common ground and remember, that we represent as legislators everyone, not just those in our party, not just those who vote for us.
Thank you. Shalfo Zephyr.
Thank you very much. You know, that power is a very, very important trust that voters, throughout the Worcester Middlesex district will be, providing, one of us here. And the power to lead on very important issues like education, like affordable and quality health care, like dealing with this opioid crisis, using that power to lead on those very important issues that are important to people across the district. The other way, or my other thought is that, as a state senator, I want to be a partner with each and every one of the 11 communities that make up the Worcester and Middlesex district. There are 11 cities and towns. They're very different, but there are some issues that cross, across the region, and there are others that are specific to each community. So what I want to do is be your partner in the state senate that will work with each and every community to realize its own goals, its own achievements, its own economic development. It's very, it's different across the district. So in terms of using that power, when I first ran for the city council after my organizing activity, it was very important for me, having gone through that process and watched the process, to have a seat at the table. It's really important when those important votes come up, when those important issues get discussed. I want to be there, and that's why I'm running for the Senate. I will be your voice, a very determined person representing you in the state Senate. So that's how I would use that power, really, as an advocate for each and every community, each and every person across the region, and as a partner in developing and helping North Central Massachusetts become better than it is already.
Thank you. Next question.
Good evening. My name is Eric Thomas. I live on Kendall Hill Road. And my question is about campaign finance. Excuse me. In 1998, there was a ballot initiative that was passed in the Commonwealth it was called the Clean Elections Bill Initiative. And Robert Reich ran for governor using funds from that system in 2002. In 2003, the legislature repealed that act, which was passed by 58% margin of the people, and just simply wiped it off the books. And so, at this point, I think we all know we have a campaign system that's awash in corporate money and special interest money. And there's, frankly, a feeling among most of the voters that our representatives are bought and paid for by the moneyed interest. And so I guess my question is, first, how do you feel about what happened in 1998 and 2003 with the clean election system? And what do you see, what would you support going forward as far as public financing of elections?
Mr. Kuchmarek.
At the risk of dating myself as a young one in the room, in 2000, John McCain, running as a Republican in the Republican presidential race, ran on campaign finance reform. And that was one of the first acts that really turned me on to politics and got me excited about what politics can be and what they should be. You had this national figure running on, looking to take money out of politics. Someone who had probably one of the best abilities to get money from corporate America was saying, we need to get it out. And that really inspired me to public service, and that was something that I remember, fondly. And I believe it was shortly thereafter that McCain-Feingold was passed, and unfortunately, Citizens United really rendered that moot. And I think we need to do whatever we can legislatively and as a people through any particular ballot initiatives as well to remove money from politics. I don't think it has a place in our political system. I'm a fundraiser by trade. I'm an unapologetic fundraiser, to steal a phrase uttered by my previous vice president. So I'm happy to fundraise, but not for political ambitions. I don't think it has a role in our political system, and I think we need to take a look at some public funding of our election systems. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that we need to move forward to do whatever is within our power.
Thank you. Ms. Shalafuz-Zephyr.
Thank you. I fully support clean elections and moving towards eliminating any kind of money that cannot be publicly or is not publicly disclosed. You know, Citizens United is a disgrace. You know, we're looking at, it's ruining our country, I think. You know, and when you look at, I don't know how many folks in this room paid attention to the most recent special election down in the South Shore, where Mr. Feeney squeaked out a win. But there was a lot of dark money spent down there, and it's nasty, and it's misleading, and in a lot of cases, it's false. So without any accountability, I think, you know, if you want to fundraise, we all fundraise, and we disclose it, you know, to the Office of Campaign and Political Finance. But, you know, this other kind of money that comes in through PACs and through other anonymous sources, we need to really get rid of it. We have to take a very strong stand, and I would be more than willing, as a state senator, to initiate that, to remove the kind of money where people don't disclose where it's from, who it's from, and there is just no accountability. That's just not how we should be conducting political campaigns.
Thank you. Mr. Mahan.
Nationally, I think the focus needs to be on some legislative solution to overturn Citizens United. It's just a law that has absolutely skewed the political system away from the people, exactly the opposite of what democracy stands for. This has pushed it away from. And I would stand up for any any idea that comes along that could be useful in doing that. I also support getting any kind of dark or anonymous money out of politics, whether it's local, state, or federal. It is a recipe for disaster, and I think that it is absolutely counter to the ideals that many of us in this room hold dear. And third, I don't know what a public payer, a publicly funded election system would look like, but I do know how much time I spend fundraising during this campaign, which I'd rather be talking to the residents of the Worcester and Middlesex district and learning their concerns better. So I would be very open-minded to a solution.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name's Emma Franzim, and I'm actually from Harvard, Massachusetts. I'm here tonight because I'm collecting signatures for the 28th Amendment. You all just spoke to the effort to overturn Citizens United. Can you answer on the record whether or not you're in support of this amendment? Also, if anyone is interested in signing this petition, you're welcome to find me after.
It sounds like something that I would definitely support. I'd like to read it. But if it's eliminating Citizens United, I would absolutely support that.
Yeah, on the basis of principle, I certainly agree with it. Like Sue, I would need to read it, make sure that I could dig into the details a little bit before I signed my name on anything. But
I just want to clarify, we're talking about the We the People amendment. Is that correct?
People govern, not money.
Okay.
People govern, not money. Okay.
So I don't know that I've read the specifics on that bill, but I can tell you that I've read some language on a similar such concept, and I'm absolutely for removing private money from our political system and corporate money from our political system, and looking to overturn Citizens United. Absolutely.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Mary Richards. I'm Vice Chair of the Clinton Democratic Town Committee. I'm going to put on my union hat for tonight, which is the Mass Organization of State Engineers and Scientists. And we are very concerned as a union that our budget has gone down 30% since 2008. It's been very difficult that we've been being asked to do more with less, that we have not have the staff to fully enforce the regulations and laws that are on the books. Currently, Moses has filed a bill to allow the departments to keep funds they generate themselves through fines and fees and permit fees. So I wondered how you might stand on that issue. Right now, it's unbelievable that only 1 cent of every dollar is now spent on environmental protection when it used to be well over 30%. So I appreciate your comments on that.
Could you just phrase that as a question? What is your specific question? to
Would
the
you
candidate?
support the increase in allowing the agencies to retain the funding that is generated through fees and fines?
Thank you. Michelle Zephyr.
I would. Funding across the Department of Environmental Protection has gone, did you say 30%? That's something that is in my head. But the enforcement activity has really been cut way back because they just don't have the staff. DEP just doesn't have the staff to go out and conduct inspections. And that's a real problem. I mean, we're talking about, protecting our water, protecting our air, protecting, the climate that we all are living in. So if there isn't a way to allow Moses to keep some of the revenue that they generate, I would support that.
Mr. Mahan.
I would definitely support Moses keeping their activities through permitting and fees and fines. As I mentioned earlier, we need to do something about our environment and move things forward, and encouraging the work that groups like Moses does is a fantastic place to start. So I would enthusiastically support it, yeah.
And Mr. Kushmarek.
Whether it's through fee or fine retention or increasing the bottom line funding from the state, I'm absolutely for increasing aid and prioritizing environmental impact within our state budget. We're currently at less than 0.5% of our state dollars being spent on environmental affairs, and that's a travesty. We're down from 1% of our state budget 17 years ago. So in 2000, we were at 1% of our state budget, looking out for both climate, the impact of climate on our Commonwealth, as well as energy and emissions reduction, renewable energy resources, and clean water throughout our Commonwealth. These are things that we need and depend on both today, and we will need for the next, for the decades and generations to come. So I think we need to look at the long and short-term ramifications and really make sure that we fund this as a priority, not as an afterthought.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, good evening. I think we're all like too tall for this mic. My name's Andrea Freeman. I live on Pleasant Street in Leominster. My question has to do with the Fair Share Constitutional Amendment, and I'd like to know if each of you would, obviously it's not up to the legislature anymore. It's been passed by the legislature in 2 sessions, even though Senator Flanagan did not vote for that, unfortunately. But what would you support it? Would you encourage your district to support it when it's on the ballot in November of 2018? Would you or would you not?
Mr. Mahan.
Sure, Andrew, thanks for the question. I think the Fair Share Amendment moves us much closer to being able to fully fund education, and it also moves us much closer to being able to grow the economic wellness of this area through investments in infrastructure. And, I definitely would encourage folks to support it. And I think that, what's been done has been done within the legislature to get it where it is. But I think now that we have it, we have a fantastic opportunity to get some funding into very needed systems.
Mr. Kushmarek.
Yes, I'm in support of the Fair Share Amendment that would place a tax on those dollars made over $1 million. And in particular, I think it's crucial that we look at those funds and ensure that those funds are placed on both education and public infrastructure. I spoke earlier about the Foundation Budget Review Commission and that deficit of $1 billion that they identified. That's certainly a revenue source and a funding source that gets us closer to closing the gap and the achievement gap in our communities, and also looking at public infrastructure. Let's take a look at what is a return on investment, what can possibly mitigate concerns from business community, and make sure that we're looking at retaining the business community and continuing investment and development efforts throughout the Commonwealth. So I'm absolutely for it. I would encourage residents of the Worcester and Middlesex district to support it as well.
And Ms. Shalafou-Zephyr.
I think I stated earlier, yes, I am absolutely supportive of the Fair Share Amendment. Oh, I do support the Fair Share Amendment. It's very, very important. I've been on the record for that for a while, and it will allow us to make significant investments in education, which is where we really need significant dollars, as well as transportation, public transportation, transportation infrastructure. Those are all very, very important issues across the North Central region, particularly to businesses. Roads, highways, access, traffic congestion hurts businesses, it hurts people trying to get to and from jobs, it hurts students trying to get to and from their classes. So I am all for the Fair Share Amendment.
Very good. Now, I got muddled up with the order a couple of questions ago, so we're just going to reset here, and this time we're going to start again with Mr. Kuchmarek. Next question.
Hi, welcome to Sterling. Maureen Cranston, Albright Road in Sterling. Mr. Mahan had made reference to what a great facility this is for our seniors, for our town. I believe every community, as you said, should have one. One of the drawbacks to doing a municipal building, what do you think it is? How about prevailing wage? What can we do about prevailing wage? There are municipal buildings, municipal projects that need to be done, but some of the holdback is the extra money. This building alone should have cost probably $1.6 million. Instead, it cost $2.4, and that's because of prevailing wage, and also, the idea that we are restricted to who we use for contractors. How would you address the prevailing wage? I've asked Mr. Ash this many times, but if we can do something through the legislature, how would you do that?
Thank you. Mr. Kuchmarek.
That's a wonderful question, and one, quite honestly, that I don't have an immediate answer to. Prevailing wage is essential to make sure that workers are paid and adequately compensated, that we're using workers who receive both benefits, compensation, and proper funding. At the end of the day, I think you're right. There's so many needs in communities, from libraries to senior centers to municipal buildings, and the construction costs continue to go up across the board. I don't have an answer for you today, and that's one that you're right. Secretary of Economic Development, Jay Ash, and those through mass development certainly play a role, and I think that's one that we need to examine more closely at a state level to see how we can mitigate its impact on communities, particularly like ours.
Thank you. Ms. Shalafou-Zephyr.
Yeah, thank you very much. Prevailing wage, it does add to the cost of construction, but costs are going up all over. That's why I support the $15 minimum wage. People need to make a living wage so that they can survive, so that they can raise families and build homes. Big projects like this, it's a very tough question, but I could not imagine trying to undermine prevailing wage. I think it's just the cost of doing business. I mean, we pay our teachers salary, people that have skills, people that do good work. I mean, we have to pay for it. It's the cost of doing business. I just can't imagine I'm trying to undermine that.
Thank you for your question. I think that as municipalities and as governments, we need to lead by example. And I think paying folks the prevailing wage, while it unquestionably adds to the cost, is very similar to a company who uses union labor or something. The folks that are being compensated in that way are being compensated fairly, and they're also being compensated while working in the safest possible working environments. And I think that's critical to encourage. I would love to speak more, with Secretary Ash or anyone else, how to supplement it and make sure that towns and cities and towns can get the projects they need done while paying the prevailing wage.
Thank you. Yes?
Maureen Cranston, still live on Albright Road. So far. Where you seem to think that I'm discouraging having quality people do these projects. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we have quality. For instance, we have an engineering firm in Leominster that worked with us pro bono for a long time. Thank you. Because that was a savings. However, he would not bid on this job. He wouldn't bid on the job because the people he has working for him, who already make $40 to $45 an hour, for him to get into this job, then he's got to pay him $70 an hour or $75. That's what I'm saying, you know. Why not have, you have the quality workers. Anyway, something that you think about, read about, talk about, you know, and fix. It's outdated at this point in the game, I believe. It was put in place, you know, for other reasons, and it wasn't put in place for central Massachusetts.
Do you have a follow-up question, Ms. Cranston?
What?
Do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, so what do you think?
Michelle, go ahead.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That is something to think about. It certainly is something to discuss, certainly with Mr. Ashen. And I appreciate you raising that as an issue. So I'd be happy to think more about it, learn more about it.
Mr. Mahan, anything further you'd like to say on that?
Absolutely. I certainly haven't, as with many issues that we discuss, I certainly have an open mind on this. While I think that, you know, the prevailing wage is important and, you know, protections like that, wage protections like that are critical, there needs to be a way to encourage competition even within our municipal projects and things. So very open-minded, and I will read more. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kushmerik.
So I'll, I guess, restate my my belief. It is the cost of doing this. It's the right thing to do with prevailing wage. And but I think your follow-up question really hit on the heart of the issue of state bidding requirements and state bidding rules and procurement rules throughout the Commonwealth. It affects both municipalities and the Commonwealth. You know, we've seen several large-scale projects throughout this region cost more or be forced to go to bidders that weren't the preferred bidder within municipalities. We've certainly seen that through several large water and wastewater projects in Fitchburg, where, you know, we feel that because of the state bidding requirements, it's cost taxpayers additional dollars for a company that the city didn't necessarily want to use on the project. And I think that really strikes at the heart of the issue of both cost containment as well as quality project management. And I think, you know, that's something as a Commonwealth we should certainly be interested in following up on and interested in providing a change to those bidding and procurement processes.
Thank you. Next question.
Good evening. Brian Pierce, 49 Boothell Road in Sterling. I have a labor question for you three also. In this district, your district, if you do win, there are a lot of employees working on the T in Boston who live in this district. They're raising families, they have mortgages, they have households. Do you support privatization from Charlie Baker on the T, or do you not? All three questions.
Mr. Mahan.
Sure, I do not. I think that the T, along with other critical infrastructure and transportation, should be owned by our government. It should not be subject to the whims of a corporation or necessarily the bottom line of a corporation. Providing transportation like that is not a profitable business, and we shouldn't be trying to make it one. And we should be trying to offer service and access and those kinds of things. And I think keeping it within the government, unionized, is a much better way to go.
Thank you. Mr. Kushmerik.
I'll agree with that assessment that I think a unionized state public employee model is the one I'd like to continue to follow. We look at, you know, some of these privatized models that don't end up being held to account. So I think there's an accountability issue there as well when they're not public employees. that don't fall under the jurisdiction of the governor or the secretary structure within our state government. It shouldn't be a for-profit model, and I don't think we want a public infrastructure system that moves in that direction. Yes, we need wide-scale investment and improvement of our public infrastructure. There's no doubt about that, but I don't know that privatization gets us the improvement. I think it just reallocates the dollars, and whatever profits can be made aren't going back to us taxpayers. They're going to a third-party entity.
Michelle Zaffer.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, I do not support any of Governor Baker's efforts to privatize services, particularly public transportation, for many of the reasons that my two gentlemen friends here have said. It's a bad idea. I think we do not want profit, a built-in profit margin, in any of our public transportation or in any of our public services, honestly, that I can think of. So I would not support privatization, no.
Thank you. Next question.
Good evening, Dick Mackey, 3 Center Drive in Sterling. I want to bring us back to talking about education for a moment. We are members, we have a local school system that we fund, in addition to a regional school system that we fund. That consumes about 51% of our town budget. We're probably in much better shape than the other 4 towns in our district. And we're almost at the tipping point in terms of the regional school district and being able to continue funding it at the level that they need. What can you do to make sure that the regional school districts are adequately funded? Thank you.
Mr. Kushmarek.
I don't think it's just our regional school systems here who are suffering too. I think we look at the Chapter 70 allocations that provide state funding to towns, municipalities, as well as regional school systems. And we look at Chapter 70, and this is a model that hasn't been changed in nearly 40 years. There's a methodology and a formula here that's outdated, and that, yes, it's not a sexy topic. No one wants to dive in and run a campaign on changing a funding formula for education, but at the end of the day, it's desperately needed. So it's both a looking at and changing our current allocation system that disproportionately affects areas outside of 495. But we also, again, and I hate to harp on it, we go back to that Foundation Budget Review Commission. $1 billion extra dollars, that's a big number. We talked about implementing that, the state legislature did, in a 4-year period in $250 million increments. We haven't moved forward with that. We have representatives in our delegation who fought diligently for it, but we need to continue advancing down that path. So I'd fight diligently to increase that funding for Chapter 70, changing our funding formula, and also looking at special education and the circuit breaker program, which is essential for special education funding, and really taking a realistic look at what the trends are telling us. Currently, we're funding it at 15% of our students in the Commonwealth being special education students, but we know really it's closer to 16 or 17. So we need to really take a realistic look at where the trends are going and make sure we're funding it appropriately, not only for today, but for the next decade.
Thank you. Ms. Shalafu Zephyr.
Yeah, thank you very much. We do have to fix the formula. We have to change the formula. Not only is special ed one of those parts of the formula where communities are very underfunded, but there are other English language learners, for example, or other students that they're part of urban communities that aren't adequately funded. But another thing that we really have to look at, I think, long and hard is transportation. Transportation, I think, particularly for regional districts, is very expensive. And it is something that the state has cut back on. So that's another area. In addition to the formula, we really need to take a look at how we are covering transportation costs, particularly for rural districts.
And Mr. Mahan.
Thank you. Excuse me. The changing of the Chapter 70 funding, formula is critical. If you look at any mathematical model that would be built today to build that budget would not resemble what's on the books. And, we feel that in a variety of different ways, but most often with regional school districts, there's a disproportionate amount of that funding that does not stay within the school district. And, wealthier communities that are not, impacted by the same things that many of the communities in north central Massachusetts are benefiting somewhat from that. And I think that we need to make sure that it is an equitable system. And I think that, starting with Chapter 70, as well as encouraging the Fair Share Amendment that could more fully fund the needs of the district.
Well, we're coming down to the last few minutes that our candidates have generously allotted for this event. So I think that we can take perhaps 2 more questions. Anybody just dying to ask a question? Come on up.
Frank Cummings, I'm on the Sterling Democratic Town Committee. I've been trying to think of a question to ask to get to real heart of who you are and what you feel and what you represent. I think I'm going to ask it like this. Representative Naughton, I think he's still back there, I'm sure is tired of hearing from me, as are my federal representatives. Name 1 or 2 issues that have moved you enough to contact your current representatives, either at state or national government.
Michelle Zephyr.
Most recently, I was in contact with Senator Flanagan's office, and this was about finding a treatment bed for a young man who is addicted to opioids. So that was something that I contacted Senator Flanagan's office about. And in terms of a second issue, it's been really about education. What can we do about it? This is the inequities across the region are a real problem, and how are we going to shift and change that? And again, this was a conversation that I had with Senator Flanagan. So trying to think, I know I've contacted Senator Warren's office, and it will come to me. I'm sure it will. I will remember. But those are the 2 most recent concerns that I've had, is with opioid treatment and with education funding.
Mr. Mahan.
Thank you. Frank, I think we're probably in the same boat in that folks are sick of hearing from me as well. The most recent thing that I've reached out, and this was reaching out to Congressman McGovern, is about women's rights and really in particular women's health care. I have 2 young daughters at home, and that's really magnified the need for, in my mind, and the steps that I need to take to fight so that my little girls can have the same kind of access that anyone else, and that every woman in society can have access. And I think we need to start by addressing the way that we look at men's health care versus the way that we look at women's health care. They're not the same, and they need to be. And I spent some time with Gladys Rodriguez in Congressman McGovern's office, and I also mentioned it to him when I was at the Johnny Appleseed Festival with him.
Thank you. Mr. Kuchmarek.
So the first one that comes to mind, I started as a college student contacting my local congressman, and then as a continuing professional in higher education, looking at the crippling costs of higher education debt for an entire generation. It's a growing issue at a federal and a state level. It's one that certainly I know firsthand, and I was fortunate enough to go get a public higher education degree, but I'm still currently paying for my state education, and I will be for the next 10 years, as will my wife. And it's a major portion of our monthly income that we continue to spend. And I think we need to find a solution both at the state and the federal level, and it's something that I spoke at in front of a couple of commission hearings with the Commission for Higher Education, as well as then Representative Dina Talley, who got really sick of hearing from me over the course of my 4 years as a student. And then I think he's thankful he's mayor now because he doesn't have to hear about state higher education issues from me. And the other one is elder care, home care, and I'd say general social services. In particular, I was really amazed to hear that throughout our Commonwealth we have elders who frequently end up in nursing homes who are considered low activity, and they're deemed as being only a small activity away or needing small amounts of services to return back to the community 13% of our residents throughout the Commonwealth right now are deemed low activity, and instead right now they're still in nursing homes. And with little or very few community-based services and support, they could return to the community. That would save taxpayers. You're talking about thousands of dollars a month per resident in those nursing home facilities. So I've been contacting both Representative Zlotnick, Representative Whips, and Representative Hay on that.
Thank you. One more question we can take.
Clearly, I had an agenda when I asked my last question, and even though I'm an out-of-towner, I've been thinking the same way that you were thinking. What's the one summary kind of question I could ask you? So here it is. How are you going to evaluate your own success in this role should you be elected?
Thank you. Mr. Mahan.
Yeah, right. It starts with being elected. November 8th is the first measure. But in all seriousness, I think the evaluation of how you need to evaluate yourself is how much good you're doing for folks. And that comes from a true measure of being in touch with your constituency, working hard for your constituency, and seeing the lives of the people that you're interacting with improving. And that's really the only measure that I would use. If I stopped being able to do good for my neighbor and your neighbor, then it would be time to move on.
Thank you. Mr. Kuchmarek.
So I'd both look at it from, yes, the human impact and being accessible and making sure that I stay accessible and that residents and constituents and businesses continue to reach out and avail themselves of the office. But I think at the end of the day, I look at it in terms of being able to build a collaborative and cohesive state delegation. We have incredible state representatives. Hank Naughton is or may still be in this room, and you know he's one of many who fight for this district each and every day. And Senator Flanagan certainly did that over the past decade. And I think we need to make sure that that those in Boston are reminded that there's a whole world west of 495. And I don't think that happens when it's just one senator or one representative, you know, speaking out there from the floor of the Senate. I think that happens when an entire delegation comes together with a consistent and cohesive agenda and making sure that we have prioritized the issues that are near and dear to us. That way it's not a Leominster versus Fitchburg versus Sterling. It's instead, how do we take a regional approach and a cohesive approach to who we are as a district and making sure that we prioritize those issues and leverage every vote that we have throughout our district to accomplish that agenda.
Thank you. And Michelle Zephyr.
Thank you. In terms of measuring success in the role, I would look at how much movement have I been able to make on some of these very important issues. We do have a very strong we do have a strong congressional delegation, but we also have really strong representation across North Central Mass. Working with them, I mean, in order to move things in the State House, you have to have a critical mass of people. You have to have a critical mass of legislators that will work with you to get things moving. So that's how I work, and that's how I've always worked, is by developing relationships with people and moving forward in a collaborative way. With that said, I think these issues are very, very important. We're talking about education, we're talking about healthcare funding, we're talking about public transportation, we're talking about making changes in the way that things are today. So I think at the end of the day, the way to measure that is to really look at and be accountable for, okay, you know, you can't change things overnight, but how much movement, you know, have we been able to get on things? And I think that's very important, and I think that that kind of accountability is something that I would hope everybody throughout the district would hold, you know, their senator to. And that's how I would measure my success in that role.
One more.
All right. Stephen Warren from Holden Road, Sterling. We have a situation in federal government. The president, I think, has disgraced the people and the planet that we live on by pulling out of the Paris Agreement. I know that there are towns, municipalities, and other governmental groups around the country that are claiming the Paris Agreement for themselves. I would wonder if any of you are going to do some work to make sure within the State House that Massachusetts does, whether or not talking about the Paris Agreement, I want the spirit of that agreement to be reflected in how we in Massachusetts are going to respect the planet and the other countries who have taken this on very seriously.
Mr. Kuchmarek.
I think Massachusetts has been and can continue to be a leader in this moving forward. I think we can take a look at our renewable portfolio standard called RPS, and we made a commitment, and I think we need to continue working towards that, to 2% of the energy that we consume and produce in the Commonwealth comes from a renewable resource. That's not much if you think about it, 2%, and I think we need to make sure that we continue to work towards meeting that commitment that we said we would actually more than a decade ago through legislation. And I think part of that too is how does that affect individual ratepayers and each of us locally. That's removing caps on solar energy throughout the Commonwealth and with our utility companies. It's something that utility companies have been reluctant to do, and they have caps right now that as a ratepayer you might not be able to tie back into the grid and be able to take the most advantage out of your solar energy. I'd also look at things like carbon credits throughout the state and carbon pricing. That's something that could have not only an incredible impact on our economy, while also so you look at a sustainable funding source to this, while also looking at reducing carbon emissions. And ultimately, I look at lowering emission standards. We've set back in the late 90s 2 standards by 2020, and then by 2050 by reducing our carbon energy emissions by 25% by 2020 and 75% by 2050. And to date, we are not on track to meet that first projection of 2020. And I think we need to move forward with haste to meeting those requirements. So I think part of that is I think we can still honor and adhere to the spirit of the Paris Climate Agreement, but we can also move forward on what we said we would do over the past 2 decades.
Thank you. And Ms. Shalafou-Zephyr.
Thank you very much. The president's stand, and stance and withdrawal from the Paris climate is horrifying. I mean, it's completely irresponsible and horrifying. Massachusetts, fortunately, I keep thinking we're so lucky to live in Massachusetts because, a lot of the damage that he is sowing, throughout the country. Fortunately, we live here where we will continue to protect very important things like the environment. There are several bills that are currently in the Senate that are pending, well, in the Senate and in the House, about, carbon credits and expanding those. And I fully support that we need to be leaders, and I think we will be leaders in protecting our environment. Massachusetts has, we've got very strong environmental organizations, and we will continue to take care of this wonderful Commonwealth that we have. So I'm less worried about it because I know that we have staunch environmental advocates in the legislature.
Mr. Mahan.
Excuse me. As I said earlier, something needs to be done about the environment, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And, we all know that. There are going to be big changes. There are going to be big changes to the way we get from one place to another, how much we pay. There are going to be big changes to industry. There are going to be big changes. And, Representative Benson has a bill currently that talks about carbon pricing, and it's something that I certainly support. On another hand, I worry about the impact of small business, but I think it's something we can work towards. But what I really love about that bill, and encouraging bills like it, is that it sets the groundwork for a green industry in Massachusetts that will encourage the broad adoption of environmentally responsible behavior and commerce.
Thank you. Well, candidates, we have come full circle. It's time now for your closing statements. So we're going to go in the opposite direction from which we started. And we'll give you 2 minutes apiece for your closing statement. Let's start with Mr. Mahan.
First off, Lex, thank you so much for moderating. And again, thank you to the Sterling Dems for organizing this, and thank you all for coming. We continue to have amazingly engaged audiences throughout the district, and I think that is nothing but a good sign for the Democratic Party here in North Central Massachusetts, so thank you. I'm closing by asking for your vote on November 7th. My experience within the region through the organizations where I've served, also through traveling the district with Senator Flanagan, has shown me the issues on a regional basis that are going to affect this district both in the short and long term. And I have direct experience dealing with them. And I think my combination of executive business experience as well as my policy understanding and leadership is the right combination for the district now. As I said in my opening statement, public service is something that I've seen my entire life. And I think the ability for someone to dig in and do some good is the greatest honor that can be given to them by their community. And I ask for that honor from you on November 7th and December 5th.
Thank you. Michelle Fuzeffer.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Thank you, Stephen, for organizing and this great evening. This has been the best part of campaigning is really getting out into the communities and meeting people and talking with people and hearing their concerns and questions. And thank you, Lex, for moderating. This is a very important election, very important. Out here, the area has turned a little purple, and we really want to keep this area Democratic. We want to keep that seat Democratic. I have, a lot of experience, over 20 years of experience, working on issues that are important across the region. I got my start in an environmental issue, and since then, have served on the city council, have advocated for people across the area, have worked very, very hard building coalitions and building relationships with people to get work done. So in the Senate, when you cast your vote on November 7th, think about who can move things forward for you in the Senate. And I think I am that person, and I do because of my experience and my track record. So I would ask you all for your vote on November 7th, and again on the 5th. We'll work very, very hard for you. And you will have a staunch, hardworking, very determined advocate in the Senate who will represent you and, will be there for all of your concerns and questions and will be available to you. So thank you very much. And again, I ask for your vote on November 7th.
Thank you. Mr. Kushmarek.
I too want to thank everyone for being here this evening, for participating in this process. For me, this is a dream, just sitting here and being a part of this process, and it's a privilege. I didn't always think that I'd be here. It was never a foregone conclusion that I could be in a situation to run for state office, or that I would be in a situation to drive a car that I own here, or be sitting here in a suit. I came from a working class family. My father was a laborer, and my mother was a stay-at-home mother with 5 children. And there were a lot of hard years, and I remember growing up on food stamps and on fuel assistance. And I remember my parents having to make tough decisions about whether this was going to be a good Christmas for the kids or a year that we could actually pay the heating bill. And those experiences don't leave me, and those drive me. And that's my motivation in life. I've worked hard to make sure that I was able to leave that behind and be able to provide a better life for my family. And my siblings and I are fortunate to have had that opportunity to get where we are. And that's the lens through which I evaluate my decisions, is remembering where I came from and where we are now. There's so many in this room here who have had to fight so hard and continue to fight so hard to maintain a middle-class life and to be able to keep it and hold on to it And there's a lot throughout the Commonwealth who feel like they're left behind, like they haven't had those opportunities. And for me, I'll continue to fight for them. And I'll continue to fight for each one of you for those opportunities and for that ability to enjoy, the middle class life and the American dream that we all have. I'll continue to fight tirelessly for you each and every day. And so I ask for your support on November 7th and on December 5th. Thank you all.
Well, Mr. Kuchmarek, Ms. Shalafu-Zephyr, and Mr. Mahan, I want to thank you for your views, your contributions to a very, very vigorous discussion of issues that are so important to all of us in our district. I also want to thank you, our live audience, for your questions, and I want to thank our viewers for tuning in and enjoying this special event, which is going to be rebroadcast several times on SLCT, Sterling-Lancaster Community Television. I want to thank all the terrific volunteers that are here this evening from SLCT who made this happen. I want to remind the viewers that the special state primary, in case you missed those dates, will take place on Tuesday, November 7th, and the special state election will take place on Tuesday, December 5th. In addition, we are very fortunate and honored to have Representative Naughton here with us this evening. And he has asked me to let our viewers know that a week from today, on Sunday, October 29th, from 4 to 6, he will be hosting a candidates night event at Turner Hall in Clinton, looking at really the issues that are pertinent to Sterling, Clinton, Lancaster, and Berlin, his area. So make a point of going there. And also the following day, on Monday, October 30th, he is having a fundraiser friend-raiser from 5:30 to 7:30 at the Sterling National Country Club. And to get information on that or to let them know you're going to show up, you can email naughtoncommittee@gmail.com or phone 978-365-1955. You can find out more about our candidates and their positions at sterlingmeetinghouse.news.com. The Sterling Democratic Committee also has a Facebook presence, and all of our candidates also have their own Facebook, both Facebook and website presences. So make sure you look those things up, and most of all, get out there and vote. Thank you for watching.